Shabbat Shalom. This week we start the book of Leviticus. So this portion called Vayikra starts out with explanation of the different sacrifices, how they're done, and what they're performed for. And this for me has always been something that's been really difficult to keep track of. In the past, it's been hard for me to remember what's different about each sacrifices, and so I paid a little extra attention this week when studying the portion, and I looked, as I like to do, deeper into the meaning of certain words, and I found some really cool stuff. So I'm excited to share what I found. And in Leviticus chapter 1, the first sacrifice that we learn about is called the burnt offering or the olah offering. And this is an offering that anyone can make, and it can be a bull from the herd or a sheep or goat from the flock. And I wanted to look up exactly what burnt offering meant. I think a lot of people fall into this same issue, which is the issue that I was having, which was thinking or understanding all sacrifices to be for sin, and they're not all for sin. There's different achievements from each sacrifice. And so the burnt offering is very interesting about this one. The word in Hebrew is olah, and the definition of this word is really a step, or if you think of it collectively as stairs in the sense of ascending. And this made me think of two different things. First of all, you think of the smoke ascending to Yahweh, but I think even more importantly, you think of us ascending to Yahweh. We're becoming closer to Yahweh through this sacrifice. And something very critical about it that the scripture points out is that the sacrifice has to be without blemish. And the Hebrew word there that's been translated as without blemish is tamim, and it means complete, whole, entire. It has connotations of the sense of integrity, truth, and undefiled. That is what Yahweh is, and that is what we should strive for. And what the offering does is it says in verse 4, what's happening is the person bringing the offering lays their hand on the head so that it may be acceptable as expiation. And expiation means essentially to cover or to purge. It's an atonement or reconciliation. And so the whole idea of this offering is to kind of reconcile us before Yahweh. So this does have to do with sin in a way, but it's not for the forgiveness or the purging of sin so much as it is essentially cleansing us and getting us back to this idea of ritual purity and ritual cleanliness, which of course goes away when we sin, but you don't have to sin to offer this burnt offering. You can offer this offering whenever you like. And I see it as whenever you want to get even closer to Yahweh. That idea of ascension. Now what's really, really interesting here is, from what I can tell, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but it's the person bringing the offering who actually kills the offering. And then Aaron and the priests are the one who deal with it after it's been killed. But the sacrificial act itself is done by the person bringing the offering. And what's very interesting when it's talking about the bull being the animal for the offering, there are two words there. One which means cattle, but the other word is ben, which is the Hebrew word for son. And so what I get from there is he should kill the son. And that's what ascends us and gets us closer to God. This is exactly what happened with Yeshua. We killed him. If you go through the trial and just the physicality of it, not just the spiritual significance, it was the people who killed Yeshua. They called for his death. They released the other prisoner, Barabbas, in his stead, and they killed him. And he, of course, was the sacrifice without blemish. He was perfect. He was the truth. He was complete and entire, full of integrity. And so I just found that really interesting connection from this very first offering that's described in Scripture. Now, if you move on in chapter 2, this is the meal offering. The meal offering is interesting because there is no blood. And the blood is important because it's what is sprinkled on the altar, and it purges the altar. It cleanses the altar. But the meal offering, it's a gift. It's a present. There's no blood. And you could offer it raw, or you can offer it cooked. Raw being just the flour mixed with oil and frankincense. The really interesting thing about frankincense is that the definition of the word has this idea of white. It's something white. It's like a white resin. As we know, white is symbolic of purity, of cleanliness, no sin. What's also very interesting about this offering is that all of them, any meal offering that you offer, needs to be offered with salt. And the phrase used actually is salt of the covenant. And this is really interesting because I looked up the word for salt, and it's malach. And the definition of the word, as well as the root word, has this idea of tearing into pieces, or rubbing into pieces, tearing away, making something disappear. The covenant itself, that word, has the idea of cutting. If you remember the covenant, where Yahweh walked between the cut pieces, and so that's the idea of covenant. And so I guess that's why salt would have to be used, because the meaning of the word salt really is the same as covenant. It's this idea of breaking apart and disappearing. Now, I guess you could also look deeper into it and think of yourself disappearing, your sin disappearing, your human nature disappearing, in light of being slowly and eventually becoming one with Yahweh and with Messiah and with their way of life. Now in chapter 3, we see the well-being offering, also known as the peace offering. The word here is shalem, which sounds very, very similar to shalom, and indeed they have the same root word. That, of course, means peace. It's like a thanks offering. You're thanking Yahweh. But what's also very interesting is it has this connotation of being safe. Of course, if you're safe, you're at peace. There's nothing to be afraid of or worried about. And with this offering as well, it's the one who brings it who sacrifices it. There, of course, is blood that's spilled. Remember, it was the blood of the Passover sacrifice that offered protection. And so I see the blood here as being protection, being safe. And this is one of the offerings where the fat has to go to Yahweh. All of the fat in the animal is burned and offered up to Yahweh. And at the end of this passage, it's indicating that all fat is Yahweh's. It's not to be for the priest to eat or for the people to eat. And the fat is just the richest or the choicest part. That's often what it seems. I mean, if you've eaten meat, a fattier piece of meat before, the fat is what gives it the flavor. It can be, if it's cooked right, it's really tender and just kind of melts in your mouth. And so that choicest part is to be reserved for Yahweh. And it makes sense that it would happen with this offering, because this is a peace offering, a thanks offering. If you're thanking Yahweh for his protection over you, of course you're going to want to give him the best of the best, or at least I hope we would. The passage also then goes on to talk about sin offerings, and these are for unintentional sins. So sins that you commit against the commands of Yahweh without, you're not doing it on purpose. Maybe you do it unwittingly without thinking. An example, one of the first times that I observed the Feast of Unleavened Bread, I was in grad school, and I went out to lunch with a friend of mine from another lab, and I ordered a hamburger without thinking. So of course the bun had leaven in it, and I realized it later that day. I was like, oh no. But I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't think, oh yep, I'm going to break this commandment because I just really want a hamburger today and I don't care. So the sin offerings are for unintentional sin that either you become aware of later because you thought of it, or somebody else says, hey, look, this is what happened. And then there is an offering for the priests. If the priests perform an unintentional sin, there's an offering for the community, if the community as a whole engaged in sin. And then there are individual offerings for individuals who do this. And now for the priests in Israel, it's the cows. So it's the big 4-footed beasts. For the individuals, it's goats, the smaller animals of the flock or the herd. And in these offerings, it is the blood and the fat. So you have the blood, which is similar to the burnt offerings, but you have the fat, which is similar to the peace offering. Excuse me. And the way I see this is, it's not only cleansing, allowing you to ascend closer to Yahweh, but it's also then thanking him for that, essentially, for giving you the means to even do this, to ascend to him, to become clean again. And those two characteristics together are what make the sin offering, and that leads to the total cleansing, not just of the person who did it, but also of the altar, which has been polluted by the sin. Now, what's really interesting about the priest's sin is that it's actually the blame falls on the people. And I find this curious. I started going one way with it, but I wasn't sure if I was going down a rabbit hole. And essentially it comes down to the Hebrew words that are actually there versus the different English translations we have, both in the JPS as well as the King James Version. And essentially, kind of the thought process that I was going down is that, yes, the priest could be himself breaking one of these commandments, but it may also be that he is sinning against the people by not effectively helping them be cleansed after sinning as well. And that is why the blame falls on the people. And that's why it's the priest's sin. Because he's not doing his job, which is to essentially help the community make sure that they're in a state of cleanliness so that they can ascend, approach Yahweh, and be in his presence. And that's what the priest is there for, is to be that mediator and to help with the sacrifices and to make sure everything is being applied appropriately. And so that's kind of the thought process I was having there with that passage, and that probably is part of it, and probably also it is just simply that the priest himself broke one of the commandments. So I think there's a couple of different things going on there, but you know that priests and teachers and people in leadership positions are judged more harshly because they have a responsibility toward the people. And if they break that responsibility, the consequences are really serious for the people. And that's why the judgment is harsher on the people in leadership positions, because if you are not doing your job correctly, people can be doing things that separate them from Yahweh and put their lives in danger, both spiritually as well as physically. So it's a little bit shorter this week, but still a lot of deep significance going on in this portion. I really enjoyed it. I actually don't remember a lot about Leviticus, which is kind of silly because I read it every year. But this year I'm getting a lot more revelation through every single book of the Tanakh that I'm reading, so or of the Torah that I'm reading. So I'm really excited to see what happens in the coming weeks and see what more I learn from the book of Leviticus. So I hope you enjoyed it. And again, as always, please feel free to share your insights in the comments. I love seeing what other people have to say. Again, I'm not trying to be in a position of leadership here. I'm not trying to teach or tell people this is how it is. I just got really excited about a lot of the revelation that I've been having, and I wanted to share it. Making the videos is a way for me to not only share it, but also kind of record it for myself so that I can go back a year from now or 2 years from now and see where I was at in my journey and see how I've grown and what new things I've learned and picked up from the Torah portion. It's like a way to mark my journey and see where I've been. So, yeah, I'm humble before you. I'm not trying to say that I'm right and you're wrong. This is just for discussion and for sharing thoughts and revelations. So don't be shy. Share your comments and let's discuss this Torah portion and see what we've all learned from it. Shabbat Shalom.